man died in mysterious circumstances, the police suspected his wife of poisoning him. But was that what really happened? Adelaide Blanche de la Trémoille had been born in Orléans in France in September 1855 to 35-year-old widower Adolphe, the Comte de Thurs d'Escurey, and Clara Chamberlain, a 19-year-old whose father worked as a clerk at the London Stock Exchange. However, many years later her parentage was brought into question, as it was then claimed her father was in fact an Englishman of good social position who funded her trial. This gentleman was also thought to have had a hand in arranging the marriage of Adelaide to Thomas Edwin Bartlett, known as Edwin, a wealthy South London grocer, in 1875. Young Adelaide spent 2 years at school in Stoke Newington, then following her marriage, moved into the flat above the little grocer's shop in Herne Hill. In 1881, Adelaide gave birth to a stillborn baby, even though the marriage was supposed to be platonic, as the pair were ill-matched. Following their move to Merton, Adelaide began an affair with the Reverend George Dyson, a Wesleyan preacher. They had met in 1885, when her husband had engaged the young minister to tutor his wife, and according to Adelaide, he had no real issue with their friendship developing into something more intimate. Bartlett also made Dyson the executor of his will, and in that will he left everything to his wife, as long as she never remarried. By 1885, the couple had moved again, and were living in Claverton Street in Pimlico, but her lessons with Dyson continued uninterrupted. Over time, however, Bartlett became ever more distressed and seemed to be tired all the time. A blue line was noticed on his gums, and when Adelaide saw this, she called in a young physician, Dr. Alfred Leach, on 10th December. Although he examined Bartlett, who was suffering from diarrhoea, sickness and pains in the abdomen, he failed to make the connection with the blue line and slow lead poisoning, and prescribed mercury for syphilis instead. Bartlett's health grew worse at a time when Adelaide's affair was gaining more momentum. She told Dyson she needed some chloroform to put on a handkerchief to wave under his nose to stop his romantic advances, and being utterly besotted by her, Dyson went out on 28th December and purchased a quantity of chloroform from a number of separate chemist shops in Putney. He told the chemists John Humble, Thomas Penrose and Joseph Snelling he needed it for cleaning purposes. Instead of the single large bottle that normally would have been purchased, 4 smaller ones were bought. On 31st December that year, Bartlett, who'd had some upper teeth extracted earlier in the month, returned to the dentist on Charwood Street to have another tooth extracted. He returned home in a hansom cab and went on to have a light supper with Adelaide. She had ordered some nuts, fruitcake and some brandy, which he no doubt enjoyed to kill some of the discomfort in his mouth. After he'd gone to bed, Bartlett spent the night tossing and turning, while Adelaide sat by his bedside. As the hours ticked by, she fell asleep, and when she woke around 4 the next morning, New Year's Day, Bartlett was dead. Leach was called and arrived at 4:30, and he believed he'd been dead for around 3 hours. When he looked around, he saw some bottles and glasses, including a large wine glass, and could smell brandy. He also saw mango chutney and an ounce blue bottle of chlorodyne on the mantelpiece. He was in the room for around an hour, opened the windows to let the smell out, and told Adelaide that he couldn't grant a death certificate until a post-mortem had been carried out, as he'd formed what he called a negative opinion of the cause of death. Bartlett's father was also suspicious about his son's death and called in the authorities. Adelaide later told police that after her husband had died, she'd poured it away down a drain and tossed the bottle from a train carriage window into Peckham Rye Pond. Yet the pond on that day was frozen over, but the bottle was never found. A post-mortem was carried out on the dead man, and it was found his stomach was full of liquid chloroform, although no blisters were found in his mouth or in his esophagus. An inquest was held into the death by London Deputy Coroner Athelstan Braxton Hicks at Westminster Police Court, who returned the verdict of willful murder on 18th February by Adelaide Bartlett, with Dyson being an accessory before the fact. They were committed for trial on Saturday 20th March. Police arrested Adelaide and Dyson for the murder of Bartlett, and the pair stood trial at the Old Bailey in London on Monday 12th April 1886, before Mr Justice Alfred Wills. The Crown prosecution case was led by the Attorney-General, Sir Charles Russell, while Adelaide and Dyson were defended by Edward Clarke. The courtroom and public gallery were packed. Many were astonished to see Adelaide, who had by this time become notorious for her extramarital affair, not wearing a hat, and furthermore, her short-cropped hair. Dyson was released immediately, it being proven he'd had no hand in the murder of Bartlett, although there was speculation he'd been the one to get rid of the empty chloroform bottle. Now Adelaide faced the charge alone. She was stoutly defended by Clarke, who claimed that due to lack of blistering, the chloroform must have been administered by way of a tube, but he told the jury Adelaide had no medical knowledge and it was a tricky procedure, even for professionals. Instead of the pretty Frenchwoman killing her husband, he suggested Bartlett himself had administered it in order to take his own life. The bottle had been left within his reach, and with all his health issues, the tossing and turning, and the lack of affection from his adulterous wife, he had perhaps taken the fatal dose simply to end all his troubles. On the other hand, Adelaide knew she was living at a time when divorce was almost impossible, and would never truly be with her lover. Bartlett was repulsive to her, so had she taken matters into her own hands? Had she persuaded him to end it all, and suggested putting it into a tot of brandy to hide its taste, and its painful physical effects on the body? Clarke won the argument that day, and Adelaide Bartlett was acquitted, leaving court a free woman. Thousands of spectators lined the streets around the court, and cheered as she made her way out. That night, Clarke received rapturous applause when he attended the theatre, and his career took off following this case. Others were less convinced that it was the right outcome. Queen Victoria's Sergeant Surgeon, Sir James Paget, was overheard by John Coleridge, Lord Coleridge, to say that although Adelaide had been acquitted, it is hoped in the interests of science she will tell us how she did it. Following the trial, Adelaide Bartlett fell into obscurity, and it's unknown what happened to her. As for George Dyson, there were many rumours about what happened to him, one being he emigrated to Australia. It was also rumoured he'd left England for the USA, where he changed his name and married a socialite, dying in 1928.